Hello, everyone, and welcome to Work Ready, What's New in Workplace Communication. My name is Ole Kagan, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for LA County Library. Work Ready is a program where we're helping people who are affected by COVID either get a job or get improve your current work situation. So that means get a raise or just plan a more sustainable career path. And we're doing that in 3 ways. The first is we're lending out laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots out of 20 library locations for 6-week periods. So you can check out that laptop, check out that hotspot for internet access, go to interviews, apply, gain some skills by taking classes that we offer for free from the library, or whatever you need to do to advance your career. The way to get your hands on a laptop and a hotspot is to go to our website, lacountylibrary.org, click on Work Ready right in the middle there. And when the page comes up, you'll see there's a link that says check available laptops. You click on that, you see where laptops are available, and then you can go right to the library and pick a laptop up. Now, if you're going right away, then it'll probably still be there. If not, then I recommend you call that library location and ask them to put the laptop on will call for you. They'll do that, and then you'll have a few days to go and pick it up. The second way Work Ready is helping folks with jobs is by having live events just like this one and pre-recorded videos on our YouTube channel about all sorts of work-related topics. So if you are curious about how to improve your resume, we've got that, cover letters, networking, all sorts of topics. I highly recommend checking out our YouTube channel, and I'll post a link to that in the chat once I'm finished with our introduction. And the third way that Work Ready is helping folks with jobs is by purchasing the latest and greatest work-related books, ebooks, or audiobooks. So if you have a book about a certain job that you're interested in or any kind of job search questions, we've got materials that will help you with that. All right, that's the Work Ready program. And now I'm very pleased to be introducing our speaker today for What's New in Workplace Communication. Her name is Ana Silvia Torres, and she works on Work Ready with me. She's our moderator for a lot of these programs, but she is also a librarian in our Adult and Digital Services unit, and very up-to-date and knowledgeable about all sorts of work-related topics. And she's been doing a lot of research for this presentation, What's New in Workplace Communication, so she can share useful and practical information with you. And with that, I'd like to bring to the stage Ana Silvia Torres.
Thanks, Oleg. Good morning, everyone.
There you go. I'm switching over the presenter view to you, and so you can share your presentation.
All right, Okay, how does that look?
Looks great.
All right, perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you once again, Oleg, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here. If you're new to Work Ready, welcome. If you're here with us frequently, then you'll usually see me as a little box at the top of the screen. But today I'm taking the stage and presenting on what's new in workplace communication. And I'm very excited. I did a lot of research. This is a really interesting topic, and I think one that's very relevant. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera on, but I'll turn it back off on for a Q&A. And let's get started. All right, so here is our agenda for today, how today is going to run. We're going to start with a little bit of an introduction, just going to share a little bit more about me. And then we're going to lay the groundwork for today's topic by going over what communication is and its importance specifically in the workforce. Then we'll look at remote or virtual workplaces and what the pandemic has taught us about work. So that'll essentially be what's new about workplace communication. And then I'll offer up some tips for effective workplace communication for remote teams. And then we'll conclude with an sort of overview of the future of work, and then that'll lead us into our Q&A. It's a little bit about me. I've been working in libraries for the past 7 years, And I've always worked in what you would call a traditional workplace setting, meaning I leave my home and I perform my job functions in another location. So whether that was at a branch library when I was working in the public or the public facing aspect of my job, or now in my current role in adult and digital services in an office space. So for me, I had to learn a lot about what I'll be talking about today because remote work isn't something that I anticipated doing in my job as a public librarian. And like many of you, perhaps, much of the world certainly, March 2020 was a shift in work. And I, like many people, was sent home, kind of seemingly overnight. My workspace changed, as did many other things, including my coworkers. So my workspace changed, and the people that I was surrounded with on a day-to-day basis, physically, I should say, I was still communicating with my coworkers and my supervisor, but my workspace looked different. I had cats to deal with, and if you have cats, then you know that they can be very hostile. So there was a lot of workplace hostility taking over my desk, my chair, advocating for taking, siestas all day long. And so that kind of transition from working in a traditional office setting to home, not just navigating pets, but also navigating roommates, people that you live with, that can all kind of play with communication. And then learning how to navigate the technology that allows us to continue our work even when we are in these virtual settings. So I just wanted to start with that, just to share again that this is a presentation that I'm going to bring in some of my personal experience and what we've learned through these months of a lot of remote work. And then I want to ask you what communication means to you when you hear that word, a phrase, a sentence, anything that comes to mind. If you could just share that in the chat, just let me know what you think about when you think of communication. Oh, I'm sorry, skipping ahead there. And I'll just open up the chat to see if anybody has anything to add. Yeah, how we connect to each other. Expressing your ideas. Yes, that's definitely communication. And planning work. Yeah, good. Speaking. Oh, yeah, a lot of good responses are coming. Communication at work means keeping colleagues informed and up to date. Definitely. And we'll be talking about that. Actively listening. Definitely. All these really great responses. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. If you have anything more to add, keep adding them in the chat. We'll definitely bring those up later. But thank you. Thank you all for sharing. So many of you kind of touched on this already. It's ideas, opinions, communicating between coworkers. Here's the dictionary.com definition of it. It's the imparting or interchange of thoughts, opinions, or information by speech, writing, or signs. So definitely all of your responses that you shared will qualify that. And communication is key, as we all know, because that's how everything functions and moves along. Without that, then we're sort of in our silos and nothing gets done. And especially in a workplace setting, if no one is interchanging ideas, if no one is sharing a thought or an opinion, then how does work continue? So communication may not always look the same, as we'll see, but it is essentially the same thing. How you are communicating an idea, how you are interchanging something to another person or to a group of people, that's communication. And in this presentation, we'll specifically be focusing on workplace communication with an emphasis on the virtual or remote. Here's in preparation for this talk, I read this really great book, which we also have in the collection. We have it on our Overdrive collection in both the ebook and the audio, and I highly recommend it. This is a topic of interest for you. One of the quotes that stood out to me, so the book is The Digital Body Language, How to Build Trust and Connection No Matter the Distance. And a quote that really stuck out to me was, when the internet came along, everyone was given a dais and a microphone, but no one was told how to use them. We all just picked up as we went along. Erica Dewan, so that's the book. Again, I highly recommend it. And so that's sort of what a lot of remote work felt like for a lot of us, right? Kind of like the internet, just we're still learning so much about the internet. the proper etiquette, when to share what, when to do what. Similar with remote work. Of course, there are other industries that have adapted remote work for a very long time. So while it was new for us at the beginning of last year, other industries have been doing this for a very long time. So they were able to sort of teach us a little bit about that. But essentially for a lot of us, it was an overnight thing. And so we had to learn as we went along, and we're still learning. We're still learning when's the right time to send an email, when's the right time to call a meeting virtually, when do we turn our camera on, when is it okay to keep it off, things like that, which we'll touch on further along. And here's a little bit of humor. I like humor and adding that to my presentation. So you'll see a little bit of that sprinkled throughout this presentation. But just to sort of highlight the previous quote that I shared, about emailing. Alice, I just sent you an email. Here's a copy of my message, but I'll just tell you what it says. It says I sent you a voicemail telling you to look for a fax that says I want to talk to you. And so I find this really funny because sometimes I find myself doing similar things. I'll send a message saying, are you free to talk, instead of just maybe calling, like we used to do back in the day, and whether they were available or not, they would answer. And if not, they would call back as soon as they saw our missed call, or we would leave a voicemail. But now we have so many ways of communicating with people that we kind of will go through 3 different steps just to let them know, hey, I'm trying to talk to you. And so, yeah, hope you enjoyed this little comic. Now let's look at the different parts of communication. So here we have 4 different components. We have the sender, the message, the recipient, and the medium. I think the sender, message, and recipient are pretty self-explanatory, right? You have someone sending a message, the message itself, the recipient, and then you have the medium. So in this image, it kind of perfectly illustrates that for us. We have someone who is using a phone, and that phone is the medium in which the communication or the message is being sent or received, right? This person could be either be the sender or the recipient. But they need something in which that message can take place. That's part of what makes virtual work a possibility, is that we have these mediums. Right now, I'm speaking to you through my laptop, and you perhaps are listening to me through your laptop or your phones, right? Those are the mediums. And there's a message being sent. I'm the sender, the message, and then you are all the recipient. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about those mediums and the messages and the recipients and all of that. Just to kind of further along what I just spoke about, the communication process works like this. We have the sender, and that sends the message. It gets encoded into the channel, the barrier, the medium, and then it gets decoded when it arrives to the recipient. And then if there's feedback, it kind of goes through the same process: encode, channel, decode, and then the process continues. And then, of course, there are multiple ways that we can communicate, perhaps even unintentionally with others. For example, the tone of your voice can give clues to your mood or emotional state, and hand gestures can add to a spoken message. So there's definitely a lot more than just the simple kind of message recipient. Communication is very complex, and we'll take a look at that. And communication in the workforce. So these that I have up here, these 4 different bullet points, are sort of what we can call traditional methods of communication, even though they are still being used. I kind of put them in a traditional because for a long time, that's really all we had. And especially if you've worked in an office setting for a very long time, or like a physical location, this was sort of what you relied on a day-to-day, right? You had the one-on-one, which is just you in front of someone or multiple people. You have meetings, conference halls, small rooms, whatever that looked like for you, phone calls, and letters. Again, these are all being sent out, but now they're adding, these are all being used, except now we have more layers to them. Now let's break down the categories of communication. So we have our spoken or verbal communication, which includes face-to-face, telephone, radio, or television, and other media. We have nonverbal, which is body language, gestures, and facial expressions. Written communication, which includes letters, email, social media, books, magazines, the internet, and other media. Visuals, which include graphs, charts, maps, logos, and other visualizations. All of these communicate messages. Now, of course, there are other elements to all of this. For example, grammar can change the meaning of an intended message when a verbal message is being relayed. The way that someone's body language is presented can relay completely different messages than what the tone, the verbal spoken message is being said. And so, as we all know, miscommunication can have either humorous or sometimes really grave outcomes depending on the miscommunication. So it's very important to be very clear and concise in our communication, especially in the workforce, and understanding the different categories of communication so that we're aware of them when we are expressing a thought or an opinion or the likes. Let's focus a little bit now on nonverbal communication. So how many of you have heard that 98% of communication is nonverbal? Open up the chat, see if anybody's heard that. I know I've heard that before. Give it a second, see if get any responses here. Yeah, you've heard it too. Yeah, so yeah, some people are saying they've heard it. Yeah, so that's actually not true. This was the reason why we have this is because there was a study conducted by Albert Mehrabian, who actually, to his credit, he never actually said that communication was 98% nonverbal. It only accounted for those behaviors. In fact, body language reflected 55%, tone reflected 38%, and words spoken was 7% of the time of communication. So of course, books and other media have sort of run with this idea that 98% of communication is nonverbal. In actuality, it's not. So the reason why I wanted to can let you know about this stat and kind of just talk about this is, as we'll see in the next slide, that virtual team spaces largely lack nonverbal cues. So they're relying a lot more on that sort of 38% or 7% of spoken words, of tone, and those written communication norms. So that's where you kind of want to really expand on your ability to communicate verbally or in writing. We also know that in virtual teams, right, as we learned at the beginning of last year, is that communication work still had to continue. Once we realized we were in it for the long haul for a while, we still had to do that. And so we have to kind of adjust to that new framework of communication. And now we've been in it for a while. And so we'll talk about how that's changed our communication patterns. Here's our remote work toolkit. This is certainly something that I rely on a day-to-day, and perhaps you rely on this as well, even not just in the workplace, but just in your daily life. And so we have things like chat or instant message, face-to-face conferencing, things like WebEx or Zoom, group chats, things like Slack or Teams. And then we have, of course, email, which has been around for a very long time, but email even before working in remotely, but now I think we see more and more emails going out. And I also want to add that if you are someone looking into remote work, that's something that is interesting to you, or you are currently kind of in that in-between stage and you're a little bit maybe overwhelmed, or you're just realizing that you need to learn all of this, then that's one of my first tips for you is to really learn this technology. And we'll talk a little bit more about where you can find resources for it. But learning this technology, kind of understanding it, will definitely be helpful for you as you progress in sort of your remote work job searches. Now let's transition into pandemic trends, what we learned in the pandemic, what came out of it, what is going into the future of work because of everything that we've learned. So as I mentioned before, remote work for many of us was new, but it's been around for a really long time. And one of the things that we definitely learned is that it's here to stay. Many studies were conducted, some of which I'll mention further along in this presentation. But we learned that companies saw that it didn't affect productivity It didn't affect the way that work was being conducted. In fact, sometimes it boosted productivity. It definitely, for some people, was very helpful. It boosted kind of work life, being able to be home and not having to do long commutes. Certainly living in LA, that was really helpful for all of us here in LA County. Not having to, drive on the freeways was certainly reduced our stress level and various other things. But of course, we'll focus on the communication aspect of what we found in the pandemic, but I just wanted to throw out other things that we found. Zoom calls. I did mention I love memes and things like that. So how many of you attended your first sort of Zoom or virtual event, similar technology to Zoom, maybe the early months of the pandemic, or you're perhaps still attending them? Just let me know, kind of yes, or, and what that was like for you, kind of having to transition. I know for me, one of the things that quickly moved on Zoom was a book club. One of my book clubs, we quickly started meeting on Zoom, and even other groups that I'm a part of, we started meeting on Zoom just because we couldn't meet in person. And then we found that actually it's really helpful because it's during the week, and who wants to get up and go somewhere after work, right? So a lot of my personal kind of meetings and things that I like to do outside of work, we're still meeting via Zoom. Started it, and so yep, a lot of people are saying that they started it and they're still using it. Yes, learned to Zoom in the pandemic, and then Zoom. Yes, Zoom. That has become a verb. I miss the in-person meetings, but now I like not having to travel. I definitely agree with that. I love still meeting people in person, but definitely during the week, I don't have much energy for anything else than just kind of lounging about with my cat. So I agree with you, Leanne. And here I have up on the slide, let me just explain what I have here in case no one has heard of this or seen these on the left here with the cat. This is a part of several different things that happened, a lot of humorous break that I think we definitely needed in the early months of the pandemic or throughout, and we still do. But the one that I really wanted to talk about, because it's just a really good laugh if you haven't seen it, the cat one here at the bottom, where it was a lawyer, I believe, that accidentally changed his avatar, his picture, to a cat and was able to speak through it. It's really funny. I highly suggest that you go on YouTube and look at it, or just kind of type in kind of Zoom fails, and you'll go down a rabbit hole, but a really funny one. And then, a Zoom meeting here when you are in an audio call versus a video call, and kind of the difference of how you kind of present yourself. I can certainly relate to this as someone who has sort of virtual meetings weekly, and it just depends on your mood and whether you're going to be on camera. But yeah, just a little humor for you. So as I mentioned before, companies, everyone kind of quickly realized that the pandemic was going to extend for a lot longer than the 2 weeks that we thought it was, certainly here in LA, right? That went on for a lot longer, and we're still kind of in it, right? We're speaking in the pandemic as if it's past, but we know that it's still continuing, even though a lot more things have opened up. And so companies and workspaces, they went virtual, and this technology allowed them to do it. And so positions and teams that could go virtual did. And with that came technology that we may or may not have heard of before, and we may have not used before. Zoom, like I mentioned before, Teams as well. That's something that I saw on my kind of dashboard for a really long time in my computer, my work computer, but I never used it. Now we use it daily to communicate. There's also, Google has theirs, Google Meets. Then there's the WebEx, which we're using here today, and there's Slack. There's so many different kind of video conferencing or group chat sort of asynchronous sort of model technology and software out there so that remote work can continue. And then more pandemic finds. One of the things that we learned is that work and the workforce doesn't have to be limited by geography. Of course, there is jobs that you need to be in a physical location still, but a lot of work can continue even if you're not in the same office or even in the same time zone. And what has allowed that to happen is technology. So we are a lot more reliant on technology to communicate. if we didn't have it, it would be very difficult for those of us that work on computers, and basically for our jobs, we need a computer and internet access to do our jobs if we don't have that technology. So that's been extremely helpful for us, even if that means we're relying on it a little bit more than we did before. So it's just some statistics for you workers. This was in a study that was conducted that just polled workers and sort of what they're doing, what they've done since they started to work remotely, is that 49% are video conferencing more, 43% are emailing more, 42% are calling more, and 41% are texting more. So again, definitely a lot more reliance on technology, and that's probably going to be something that is going to be, we're going to be seeing a lot more of. With that, of course, we have now new norms, and we also have some challenges. So one of the things that we've learned is that difficult conversations are harder to have when there's a virtual component to them. So remember how we talked about how important nonverbal communication is, and that it's largely absent in a virtual workspace. And that might be why having difficult conversations is a little bit more difficult, right? When you're not face to face with someone and you have to speak to them about something that can be quite sensitive, and you're missing sort of those nonverbal cues, a sympathetic nod or a smile, or anything that can make conveying something difficult a little bit easier. And we're also missing the component that can help make those conversations and those interactions easier, which is kind of the casualty of work, which is that many think that workplace communication is essential. That kind of that speaking to people maybe after a meeting, or you're kind of walking together back to your office and you're sort of continuing on the conversation, or even just a casual kind of talking about non-work related things in a very sort of casual way, like maybe saying, how was your weekend? Or your coffee smells really good. What kind of coffee are you drinking? Just little things like that, that over time allow for relationship building. And in that building, you're also building trust. So when you do need to sort of brainstorm, or again, talk about something difficult, it's not so daunting, because that that person, your team. And especially if you've started working remotely, there's some people that started their positions in an entirely remote team. So a lot of time, these people can feel like your colleagues. Well, there could be respect, they could be excellent coworkers, but they're essentially strangers to you because you're missing that casualness of a physical work environment that allows for that. And then, of course, we have, like I mentioned, the absence of nonverbal markers that make conversation easier. But it also is a good way to know if someone is paying attention to you. It's very easy when someone's in front of you to know that they're not paying attention to you, right? They could be looking at the wall, they could be kind of, their face glazed over. But in a virtual sort of setting, depending on the angle of their camera, the lighting, whether they even have their camera on, their audio on, their participation level, it's a little bit harder to know if they're paying attention. And I'll share a story that kind of highlights this. Recently, I heard of an interviewee that was being interviewed, and they thought that because the person that was interviewing them was looking down, but they were looking down because they were writing notes on a notepad. But the person that was being interviewed, this was all done, of course, virtually, they didn't know that that the person was writing notes. They were looking down. And so for them, it looked like they were sleeping. And that kind of miscommunication wouldn't happen in a in-person location. They would see, oh, this person's writing down what I'm saying. And so that can kind of be a little deflating as well. And then here's just a few more stats for you. 41% of professionals say that they now share less personal information with coworkers. 23% of professionals say that they are now more professional with executives and managers, and 57% agree that informal workplace conversations are necessary. Now let's look at traditional versus digital. So I know how many of you kind of are a little confused sometimes when you get a message or something like that, and kind of an IM, and you're not sure whether this requires a response, or maybe liking comment is okay. I know I've been there where I'm like, okay, just sounds like the conversation's over, but I'm not sure if I need to respond. So let me just kind of give the sort of acknowledgement that I've seen it. So in a traditional way, that way that you can express engagement is a head movement, a tilt, a nod, side to side. In a digital setting, you can like a comment. You can also kind of smile or laugh at a comment or gesture. In a digital setting, you could use exclamation marks or emojis to kind of express excitement or kind of encouragement. There's hundreds at this point of emojis. There's also GIFs or GIFs. I always forget how to say that. But there's verbal commenting, agreement or disagreement, right? If someone is providing information, communicating or relaying an opinion, you can either verbally assent or agree. And in a digital setting, because you're missing sort of the head movements, the nod, the body language that can come with that, you have to be a little bit more detailed in your comments, whether you're in a chat, an email, or a video conference. And then another question for you, how many of you maybe have seen that your communication has changed, whether because of the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, whether that's personally or definitely in your workplace, if you've noticed a change in just how you communicate or information is being conveyed? See what you all have to say. More formal, yep, definitely, Leanne. Yep. So I would definitely agree that we've gone more formal. We've also have something called the Twitter effect, which Forbes sort of coined, just where, Twitter has these limited amount of characters that you can convey or make an impact on. Yeah, awkward talking over each other for sure. And so you have these very limited characters, and so you try to punch in as much as you can. And even when we don't have that limitation, right, in our text messages and our emails and our instant messages, we're still trying to sort of compress our language, right? We're trying to just get what we have to say out as quickly as possible in sort of the most succinct way that we can. And that happens as well as in our verbal conversations, in conference calls or meetings, which can lead a little bit to more productivity because we are sort of in this virtual setting and it can kind of be a little awkward, right? Talking over each other is disruptive in a virtual setting. There's audio problems and all sorts of things. So it's a little bit more formal for sure. And it can get a little awkward, right? If someone talks over each other, there's that static and then they continue to do it until finally, okay, now you go, I go sort of situation. That's a little bit more forgivable in person. And so, yeah, definitely it has changed the way that we are continuing to communicate in the workforce, our meetings. And then now when there are pauses in our virtual meetings, no one really is trying to fill the silence. It's sort of just that much needed break because there's something about a virtual setting that just maybe takes a little bit more from us. And so pauses are definitely more poignant, meetings are more direct and concise. Now we're going to take everything that we just learned about communication and offer up some tips on how you can kind of be a great communicator in your workplace, right? There's obviously so much more that we're going to learn as the years go by and we see that remote work is here to stay. But here are some things that I've learned. Here are some things that other people have shared about how to be an effective communicator. So of course, we sort of talked a little bit about like when to do what, when should we respond, but also when to do certain things. When should you email? When should you face-to-face? Or what does this require the entire group to come in for a video chat? Well, I would say the first thing about that is that it really just depends on what kind of information you're trying to communicate. So definitely for face-to-face, things aren't always possible, especially during COVID-19, right? That's not a possibility. But also if you're in different time zones or in different locations, we see that a lot of teams are definitely spread out throughout the country or throughout the world. So that might not be possible. Email is definitely great for sensitive information, and we'll touch a little bit about that. We'll expand on that a little bit later. Instant message is great for maybe a quick yes or no, sort of just a checking in. And then we have our meetings, which are great for sort of brainstorming sessions, just general updates for the team, just kind of getting everybody together so that they can kind of see each other, meet each other perhaps for the first time. It's probably well, I would say it definitely is the closest thing to being in person, in real time, everybody sharing a space virtually. So just a little bit more on email, and I want to emphasize email because it's, I think, been around, well, it has been around for a very long time, and we've used it even prior to working remotely. But it is really good still to continue to use it for things like sensitive information, important information, information that needs to be sent to a large audience because it allows you to send attachments, information that needs to be archived. So a lot of the instant messages, they self-delete their chats after a certain period of time. So if you know that this is something, a conversation you're going to need to refer to again, then definitely email that. And then complex information, right? You don't want to send things in an instant message or share things in perhaps a video conferencing chat that people no longer have access to, or people are going to have to be searching through the multiple different channels or team chats and things like that, or Slack channels and things like that, where people are forgetting where you put it. It's just they can refer back to your email. Emails also have the ability to sort of flag a document, flag an email so that you know it's important, and they can kind of, it sort of highlights it for you so that you know that it's there. So email is still a very powerful tool that I highly recommend for really important pieces of information. And then let's move on to some tips. So here I would say definitely develop a communication plan. It doesn't need to be an informal plan where you kind of sit down and you show it to your entire team and everybody agrees this is what we're going to do. But just something that that what's expected of you, and the expectations sort of, right? We're going to meet bi-weekly, or when I can't, how do you prefer that I call in if I can't make it to work, or things like that, that this is the avenue that we're supposed to take when I do need to reach you, or sharing things. And that's sort of onto our second point, using project planning tools to track deadlines, tasks, and objectives. So this can also look like sharing your calendar, sharing a folder, sharing a document, all of these tools that we have available to us so that your teammates know where to look for them. And this can help you with your project planning, and can also help with communication, especially when you're working on a project with a few people and they need to know where you're at in the project. And then build relationships. We talked about how essential conversations is, kind of non-workplace conversations, how a lot of workers have found that to be essential. So that can look something like, scheduling a brainstorming or a catch-up meeting. Some teams, they do lunch hour, where you don't meet to talk about work, you kind of just meet to talk and catch up with each other and learn about each other. That's definitely great for learning and building that trust that we talked about, that is really important. And then manage your stress levels, whatever that looks like for you. This is important for communication because if you're stressed out, if you're overwhelmed, that's going to affect all areas of your work productivity and your workplace communication in general. Maybe you're overwhelmed because you're receiving too many emails or too many messages. Maybe communicate that and say, can we kind of maybe cut down on the emails, or something like this. It's a great way to just let your supervisors and your team know what works best for you, and that'll help you over time with kind of, again, building that plan, building that relationship. And when you're not stressed, when you're feeling good to show up to work, that helps the entire team out. So I'll leave it at that. We all know our triggers, we all know our stress levels, so just make sure that you're kind of aware of the way that you can alleviate that for yourself. And definitely invest in training, especially if you're an employer. Don't just kind of expect, because we've all sort of have this technology available to us, that we all know the different technology that your particular team uses, especially if you are someone who's worked remotely before. Perhaps your previous job used a different software, so now you have to learn a new one. And so as an employer and as an employee, you definitely want to train. You definitely want to ask, is there training for this? And just have that available for your employees. If you are an employer or planning to sort of manage a remote team, make sure that you're always kind of sharing information that will help them learn new skills, and so that they're aware of not just with technology, but different aspects, right? Like anytime you see something that can help your team out, definitely share that with them. And then turn your cameras on. Now, this isn't always something necessary. but I would say if you're kind of in a brainstorming meeting for things like that, catch-up meetings where you will be kind of sharing a moment with your team, having your camera on just kind of really helps um, get a feel for who you are. And then you have that opportunity to express some of those nonverbal markers that we talked about that are important. It also just lets people know that you're there. Sometimes, right, if your picture is just there or your name, it's difficult to know if you're participating. For all we know, right, we could be just on and gone. I don't think anybody does that, but it's just sometimes it can be overwhelming when you're speaking to just a kind of what can feel like an empty room because no one is looking back at you. And then sometimes perhaps you don't have access to camera, or maybe if you're presenting and seeing other people's images might be distracting for you. I know for me it can be a little distracting. So maybe you can let everybody know we can keep our cameras off for now, and then we're in the kind of collaborative part of our meeting, then let's turn them back on. But definitely just something to be aware of when it comes to being on camera and that entire aspect of working remotely. And then set boundaries, both set boundaries with work, but also set boundaries with people that you live with, anyone that is in your kind of direct space. You're home, but you're still at work. So sometimes the tendency is that maybe you're home, so it's okay to kind of like intrude in your workspace and try to take up your time, and that can be really distracting for you. So definitely let your housemates know, whoever you live with. I know that can be a little bit harder for kids, right? They think you're home, so it's time to play. But definitely communicate that with everyone around you, that especially if you're on deadline or you have something very important to work on, or a meeting or a phone call that you need to be 100% present for. Let them know, maybe put a sign up on your door, do not disturb, things like that. And then at work as well, it's okay to be available, but also be unavailable. And I'll explain what I mean by that is, let's say you are on deadline and you need something done, and all the notifications that are coming through, maybe just let everybody know I'm going to unplug for a little bit. I have my phone on me, or you can email me if it's an emergency and I need to be reached, but I'm going to be kind of offline a little bit for about 2 hours just so I can really focus on this project that I need. And of course, they'll be more than happy to give that to you, because if you get your tasks done, then that helps everybody else out. So definitely communicate that with the people that you're working with, the people that you live with, whoever that may be. And here are some bonus tips for you, which I've kind of touched on a little bit. Learn the technology. So we here at the library would definitely have a lot of resources for you to learn the technology that a lot of companies are using. We have LinkedIn Learning, which I've created a resource list that will definitely go out after this in the follow-up email along with our PowerPoint presentation. But there's classes and things like that that I've highlighted, but there's definitely a lot more on those databases that you can go in and learn things like Microsoft Teams, Slack, and other technology like that. And then figure out what success looks like for you. You don't have to kind of model somebody else's. Other industries will sort of tell you this is the way that you're supposed to do it, or you'll see another person and you think they have it all. I want to kind of do it like them, but success for you might look differently depending on how your team functions, kind of the dynamic of your team, depending on how you function, right? If you're someone who does like meeting as much as possible face to face or virtually, if that's the possibility for you, then let someone know, actually, I would rather meet in person, right? Like I'm one of those people that when I can meet with someone, I would much rather do that than sort of emailing back and forth or instant messaging. I just think that for me, my creativity flows a little bit better when I can kind of talk out loud and get my ideas out. And Oleg can attest to this. We work a lot on Work Ready, and a lot of times, we sit side by side in the office when we are in the office, 6 feet apart, but we kind of bounce ideas off of each other a lot, and that's really helpful for me. Sometimes, again, that's not always possible, but share that with people, or kind of just say, this might be better in a phone call. That might be what success looks like for you, right? Maybe you're saying everybody is emailing, but you prefer getting the group together for a brainstorming session. So just figure out what that looks like for you. And then again, just be available, let people know that you're there. If they need to bounce off an idea off of you, let them know that you're there, right? Virtually, things can be a little awkward, but it doesn't have to always be so, right? We're still figuring this out. But one great thing about working with other people is that you're not in it alone. And when you build that team and when you build that relationship with people and just kind of navigating this virtual space, things can always surprise you, and you can still find ways to make build relationships and a good, productive communication system in your workflow. And then here we're just going to conclude off with the future of work. Going to touch on a little bit of the things I found. I anticipate in the coming years we'll see a lot more. So we'll have things like animated workspaces. So there's a company called Verbella that I found in my research, which is creating these sort of video game-like settings that you now, when you sign into work, you're sort of signing in as an avatar, which I think is really funny. So maybe look out for that in the future. And then we have things like hybrid or 100% remote, which we are already seeing. So it's not necessarily the future of work, but we're going to see a lot of that in the future. Some companies already have gone completely remotely and or adopted a hybrid model. And then we have things like AI assistants, which we already sort of see a little bit of, things like Siri and Alexa, but perhaps we'll have them kind of part of our work environments, scheduling our meetings and helping out, sorting out different tasks and things like that. Technology is always expanding and always expanding our potential and growth and what we can do. So I'm kind of excited to see what's out there in the future. And we'll see what that looks like. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful. And please let me know if you have any questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Anna Sylvia. That was an excellent presentation, very informative. And also, I included the practical tips at the very end. That was definitely useful. In watching this presentation, I've learned a few things. We've gotten questions throughout the presentation in chat, and if anybody out there has any questions that have just come to the fore or you haven't posted them in chat yet, go ahead and do that, and we'll try to. So let's get kicked off. So let's kick this off with this question. This is a big question for anybody who does video chat or job interviews via video. So everybody knows that there are times when you're speaking to somebody and it seems like they're in a prison. It's dark and their background is where it's hard to see them. They they're cleared. So do you have any tips for folks to, look their best on video?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, yeah, I've been on those calls too. I would say, definitely use the lighting available to you. Try to optimize the best filming time, well, not necessarily filming times, but the best sort of lighting times throughout the day. If you have windows, there are some times in the day, of course, where that can give you, if depending on what kind of blinds you have, that can kind of give you that tiger look. But maybe practice the time, the different areas in your house where you have the best lighting. And if it's in your budget, maybe buy some lights, invest in some really good lights. I know ring lights for some people with glasses, they can kind of reflect, but there's always ways that you can sort of position them in which they're not necessarily hitting you directly in the face, and they can provide some really good lighting in that case, and webcams for sure. Maybe invest in some good webcams, and then sometimes your work offers those as well. So ask what they offer, if they have any lights for you, any webcams that can improve the quality of your of your visual. And we also have some videos on our YouTube channel if anybody would like to check those out on kind of ways that we have interviews, and we have kind of what not to do in Zoom, but that also kind of covers the angles and things like that. And then interviewing as well. So where we do touch on virtual aspects, which can be definitely used for video chats as well.
Right, and we'll send all those in our follow-up email. So if you don't have those at hand right at the moment, you will soon. All right, so next question is, this is a good one. In a big meeting, where there's a bunch of people there, do I need to say hello? Like, do I need when I come in, type hello or get on the video and say hello? There's like, if there's like 50 people there.
You don't necessarily need to. I mean, that's definitely if you want to. I know that there's a lot of people who just really like they're very kind of, extroverted people in real life, and I think that kind of translates over to the virtual setting. So you always will see like the same people saying good morning, everyone, maybe like sharing an emoji or something like that. But you don't that's not necessary in terms of attendance. Whoever set the meeting up, they will see who attended. So, for attendance reasons, you don't really need to. Um, I would say that's definitely a personal preference. You can always like a comment just to show an engagement level. Just okay, I'm here, but sometimes, especially if it's in the morning, you're not really you just kind of are still waking up a little bit. Maybe the coffee still needs to hit you. So yeah, there's been some meetings where I don't always say good morning. I'll maybe like a comment or it's kind of a personal preference for sure. I think the most important thing is that you're there, you're paying attention, and that you're engaged.
Right. That's for big meetings. For smaller meetings, of
Yeah.
course, if there's just a few people, then you will say hello. That was a
Exactly.
good question from David, and hopefully, David will let us know if we answered the question. Let's see. Um, Next question. So, so Denise asks, how would you recommend handling it if the communication technology a company uses doesn't work for your personal style or even elements of your job? For example, they used to use Teams at their old job and hated it because of the lack of documentation capacity with instant messages and the difficult seeing everyone in video calls.
Yeah, I mean that's a little tough because sometimes companies have invested money in their software, so it's not a simple sort of let's switch over. But maybe I would say maybe do a little bit of research, maybe just to say this technology, that shows kind of statistics like actually this works a little bit better for engagement level, for productivity. We find that we can kind of build relationships a little bit better because we can see each other. It's not so hard, so difficult with Teams, to not see everybody when the cameras are on. And companies are probably willing to make that change if you present it in a way that will be beneficial for the overall sort of productivity of of the team, right? That's what companies want. They want their employees to be productive. They want their employees to feel like they have the tools that they need. So I would start with I would definitely lead with the benefits of the overall of transferring, transitioning the software, the benefits that it would provide for the company if you really wanted to for them to switch. And also just be aware that that still might not happen, but you never lose anything by trying.
And I would add on to that sometimes actually a people thing. So you could always talk to the people that you communicate with the most or supervisor. So for certain things, like for seeing people in video calls, sometimes that's, people have their cameras off or the gallery view that's set is it doesn't show everybody. But if people have, if it's really important to you or bothersome, then sometimes it's worthwhile to talk to a manager about that and see if they can ask people to put their videos on.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So to figure out how, if you have a certain way that you communicate to let the other person know. So, um, do you think that going forward we'll have more virtual meetings?
I think so. I definitely I think that just meetings in the workplace or kind of events. I do think I definitely still see it. Like even sometimes when we're in the office, we still meet virtually. Like sometimes I'll kind of feel like we're all here, except for like maybe one person. I mean, right now it's still because, for public health reasons. But I think that I see people still, okay, they're able to meet in person, but it just kind of works out a little bit for everybody to keep it virtual. I don't know if that would go back, but I do think that it's here to stay for sure, and that we will see more of it. Maybe at some point we'll all get tired of it and say we want to be in the same room again. But I do think that there are some things that are going to remain virtual.
Definitely. So, what is a good way to say that people can be off camera if they want?
You can say my bandwidth is really slow, and that's true. Sometimes your bandwidth, having your camera on slows down your internet. So you can always say, I need to turn my camera off because I'm losing the connection. Um, you don't have a camera, you have issues with the camera. Maybe you have things going on in the background, and you just really don't want that to show up on camera, and you're afraid that your virtual background is just not going to be enough. Sometimes they're not the best. Moving your hand sometimes can kind of get in the way of that. Um, and just say, I'd like to have my camera off too. You can also be, you know, I would communicate in this meeting better today if I had my camera off. But those are just some options that you have for you to just be off camera. I did mention that as a tip because I did see that in one of the books that I read, that a lot of people did feel like they weren't kind of speaking to sort of a screen and kind of an emptiness when they were speaking on camera, and that helps a lot of people. But that might not help everybody. I know sometimes I keep it off, and we keep it off. It's just one of those times that it just kind of gauge the situation when it's best to have it on. And I think most people will say, like, kind of like that meme, you just, maybe you're the dog on the left that morning, and for whatever reason you want it off. So yeah, and once you build that relationship with your team, it becomes less of an issue.
And I have a couple of things to add to that. The first thing is that sometimes whether people are on video or not on video is part of a company culture, whether that's the whole company or just that specific unit. So if everybody in a unit has their camera on all the time or off, conversely, then that's kind of difficult to change. But it oftentimes what the second thing that I want to say is that it comes from the top. So if the supervisor always has their camera on, then people will be more likely to have their camera on. But if the supervisor goes, you know what, I think I'm gonna turn off the camera. I think I'm gonna turn off my camera, and then invariably you'll see that everybody else, like a domino effect, turns off their camera. And if the supervisor always has their camera off, then people will also always have their camera off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that kind of has set the tone sometimes for a lot of meetings. So yeah, definitely good point.
So then this next question is interesting, and I feel a little bit sometimes. I hate communicating with people in all media. Is there a minimum per day, per week, and type of communication that will be sufficient to look engaged for the average workplace? Well, I have an answer for this one, but you go first.
Okay, let me see if I understand the question. So if there's a limit to engagement in the workplace.
So what they're saying is that it sounds like this person is an extreme introvert. They really don't like talking to people, and they want to know what would be the sort of an acceptable threshold for talking to people, or not talking to people and still appearing engaged.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean that's tough because it really depends on, I think, your work environment and your culture. If there's a lot of, like, if it's work related, then absolutely, be available and communicate. If you're kind of if you're seeing things popping up that don't necessarily have to do with work, there's not that you don't need to respond. Sometimes people like to just share information. Um, and if you just don't want to respond, then you technically don't have to. It there's a lot of times where you just want to make sure that you're there, that you let people know that you're there. You're maybe not as participating as much, but you're there. That can kind of look like a simple, I'm back from lunch, I'm in, good night. And it's kind of to take it day by day, and what's expected of you. You can also, if that overwhelms you, you can also communicate that with your supervisor and say, can we maybe create a separate channel where, everybody can kind of post non-work related things, so that I get a little overwhelmed and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to respond, and that kind of makes me feel anxious and it interferes with my work. So can we maybe create something else, and one that's just work related? You can definitely communicate that if that's something that overwhelms you, and you're unsure of. And you're definitely not the only one. I'm sure there's a lot of people. We have so much media and when we work remotely, that just doubles the media that we consume, right? Not so much consume, but that we have to intake, right? We are on our computers all day long, and then we have our phones and social media. So I completely understand. Um, but yeah, I would say communicate that, have that conversation with the appropriate person in your workplace.
I have a couple of things to add also to that. Uh, the first thing is, in an ideal world, this would have to purely to do with the person's outputs. So if they communicate project updates to whoever is responsible for whatever projects, or if they work, if they're solo and they work with clients, if they communicate the project updates and then they get the work done, then it shouldn't matter how much they're participating in sort of the day-to-day kind of water cooler discussions on the virtual channels. But we don't live in an ideal world. And so sometimes it's just about doing the kind of perfunctory, like you said, good morning, good evening, you know, back from lunch,
Mhm.
you know, going into a meeting, that
Yeah.
way, throughout the day, whoever is the people around will know that that person is there.
Yeah. You can always
Um,
just like a comment too, or, you know.
yeah, yeah. When you like things, that people know that you're there because they see that all that is really is clicking.
Hmm.
So there's that. Um, that's pretty much yeah. It's a tough thing. But one way to help, one thing for me that helps me, and that is to mute channels. We use Microsoft Teams for our own internal communication with the library. And there are group channels. Sometimes we'll have a lot of conversation happening there, and it's very distracting to me. I'm already kind of distractible, and so one of the challenges working virtually is that things are always popping up. And so what I've done with some of those channels, especially the more active channels, is that I've just muted them, and so that way I don't get a notification when somebody talks to them. I can just check them myself whenever I'm interested, whenever I want to know what's going on there. I just click it open and I can read all the messages to participate. So that also takes a little bit of pressure off being engaged all the time. Because when I see a notification, like I need to go there. So turning those off means I don't necessarily have to participate in every discussion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's see, had a few more questions. If anybody else has more questions, we've got a couple more, but if anybody else has other questions that we haven't covered yet, please do post those in the chat. So the next question is, what level of online security can we assume or request when we're in these virtual settings?
That's a good question. Um, I mean, with anything kind of online, you are sort of um, susceptible to what can happen. I remember when Zoom was sort of like a big security risk for a lot of people. I think they've ironed that out now, but um, just definitely ask your company. That's a kind of company by company. Sometimes they are like the clouds. I'm blanking on the name. I'm sure you know what they are. Oh, like kind of
Mm.
what are they? The
Sorry, say again.
like the clouds that are specific to the work environment.
Channels.
No,
Um,
it's like Amazon cloud.
the cloud services.
Yeah, like
Uh,
sometimes those are like private, like VPN. Oh,
mhm.
VPNs, that's what I was
VPNs.
thinking of.
Yeah, well, that's a
VPNs.
yeah, VPN, virtual private network.
Yeah, like maybe you can ask for that. Like I know those can be quite expensive coming out of, yourself, your own to invest for like a work setting, but and a lot of companies are have their own like private ones for
Yeah, a lot of
like
companies, especially big companies, will
yeah.
already have those things in place just because they want to protect their own assets. So if a person is working remotely on a work computer, that work computer will tend to have some sort of firewall, some sort of VPN, in order to so that the company's stuff isn't vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. So see if your company has that. And sort of if they don't, then maybe present to them the benefits of that. It would protect their information. It would make you feel safer. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I can't speak to every company and how they would approach security, but I do know that it is important for companies, like you mentioned, big and small. They don't want information leaking. And you as an employee, you don't want your personal information out there either. Um, so yeah, that that's important to kind of look at the different software available to you, present that to your supervisors, the adequate person in charge of that, the tech teams, and let them know that is a valid concern that we all have. And I'm sure that that's something that they are also concerned about as well.
All right, and this is the final question, so I don't see any other ones in the chat. Do you have any tips on how to change your background in Zoom or Teams? Now this question seems very specific to these particular pieces of software, so I don't think we're going to be going into what buttons to press, but if you email me, Miriam, I can send you links to the help pages for both Zoom and Teams that will teach you how to do that. But what I do want to ask is when I want to generalize that question a little bit more and to ask if you have any tips for virtual backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, keep it professional, like make sure that it is maybe something that is in line with your workplace. We have ours that are kind of our logos in the back. Yeah, it's LA County and it's a library. But before that, I was using one that was like a library. I just had like a generic sort of library because, I'm a librarian. It kind of makes sense. So I would say maybe if you want to go that route, just kind of be fun with it. Maybe something in line with your work environment. Also, there's just like I know WebEx has already preloaded ones that like are in Office. Or you could always just blur your background. That's effective too. You can, if you really want to be fancy, you can kind of get like a green screen and just make it a really high quality background. Um, yeah, I think just anything that isn't too distracting also. You don't want anything that people are kind of like, what's back there? More interested in looking at your background than you or what you're saying. So yeah, anything like muted colors, things like that, just solid backgrounds. Offices are always a safe bet. Yeah, those would be sort of my tips.
All right, and Sylvia, thank you so much for today's program, for teaching us about workplace communication. I think that the folks out there really got something useful from it.
You're welcome, and I hope so. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and thanks everyone out there for sticking with us. We'll see you next week. Good afternoon and good luck.